Has anyone ever accused you of being too emotional just to dismiss your pain?
When I bought the house, modest, nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a slightly slanted porch, and a creaky gate, I didn't expect the internet to explode. I didn't expect the post to spread like wildfire or for the comments to become so personal, so cruel, so downright surgical in their judgment. All I did was post a picture of me holding up the keys, standing in front of my own house near the university campus, wearing an old hoodie and a smile I hadn't earned through compliments or encouragement, but through scraped knees, unpaid internships, and the quiet kind of persistence you develop when no one believes in you. The caption I typed wasn't poetic or clever. It was just the truth. They said girls don't need education. So I got scholarships. Now I live 10 blocks from where they paid 6 figures for my brother's degree. That was it. And then all hell broke loose. But that post, that reaction, was just the surface. The roots of this story go back a long way. Not to some single dramatic event or childhood trauma, but to something more insidious, something that seeps into your bones slowly, the accumulation of quiet dismissals, backhanded comments, low expectations served with a smile, and "it's just how things are" statements that stack up over years until you start to question whether you were ever supposed to dream at all. I was 16 the first time I heard my dad say it out loud. It was a Tuesday night in late fall. My mom was baking something sweet. I think it was her banana bread, the one she always claimed Ethan liked best, and my brother was in the living room, going over Princeton's admission requirements with that smug certainty boys sometimes have when they've never once been told no. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my algebra homework, trying to focus through the smell of sugar and cinnamon. And Dad was sipping his beer, half watching the news, when he muttered it. Girls don't need fancy education. They just end up staying home anyway. He said it like it was obvious. Like it was common sense. Not cruel, not directed at me, just stated, like the weather. No one flinched. Mom didn't correct him. Ethan didn't even look up. And I just sat there, holding my pencil like a fork in a fight I wasn't invited to. I didn't say a word, but something lodged itself in my chest that day, a kind of silent rage I didn't know how to express. Because here's the thing, I'd just gotten the highest SAT score in the district. I had teachers pulling me aside, telling me I could go wherever I wanted. And yet, in this house, in this room, I was already dismissed. When Ethan got his acceptance letter a few months later, it was like the second coming. They hosted a dinner, not just for family but neighbors too. Balloons. Cake. A banner that said, "Welcome to the Ivy League," in big, stupid letters that I pretended not to care about. He made jokes about needing to pack his suits and networking with senators' kids, and everyone laughed. I smiled too. That fake kind of smile you learn early if you're a girl in a house like mine. I didn't even bother bringing up my own SAT scores, which, for the record, were higher than his. Not by a little, by a lot. But nobody asked. Nobody noticed. I was told to look at some local options, maybe the community college or a decent state school, and to not get too carried away. My mom said it softly, with that overly sweet tone that made it worse. You don't want to overwhelm yourself, honey. There's no need to chase all that stress. So I did what any girl raised on silence would do. I smiled. I nodded. And I started applying in secret. Late at night, after they went to bed, I'd use the family laptop to research scholarships, write essays, and fill out forms. I learned to clear the browser history. I memorized deadlines. I worked weekends at the local bookstore and saved every dollar in a crumpled envelope under my mattress, just in case. There was one night right after Christmas when my dad made a comment that almost broke me. Ethan had come home with expensive luggage and tales of wine tastings and real professors who actually know people. He was holding court, telling stories, and my dad was beaming like he was already retired and Ethan had bought the whole family a beach house. Then, out of nowhere, Dad said, "At least Ethan's gonna make something of himself. That's what this family needs." I was sitting 3 feet away. I didn't say anything. I just bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Because what was I supposed to do? Tell him I'd just been shortlisted for a national scholarship competition? That I'd aced my AP exams? That I was working 2 jobs and keeping straight A's? It wouldn't have mattered. Not to him. Not when I didn't have the right chromosomes. So I waited. I planned. And when the acceptance letter came full ride, out of state, a respected university with a solid data science program, I didn't scream or cry or announce it at the dinner table. I didn't expect a cake or a congratulations banner. I simply folded it up, slid it between my textbooks, and kept moving. 3 months later, on a Sunday morning, I packed my bags. My mom was at church. My dad was mowing the lawn. Ethan was already back in New Jersey, posting Instagram photos from some lake house with frat boys wearing boat shoes and pink shorts. I left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "Don't worry about tuition. I've got it covered." And that was it. No speech. No tears. No explanation. Just one sentence, written in the same quiet tone they'd used with me my entire life. That was the last time I called that place home. And the beginning of everything else. The first night in my dorm, I lay awake on a mattress that felt thinner than ambition itself, staring at a ceiling covered in flaking paint and wondering, not for the first time, if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by choosing to walk a road my family never thought I was meant to travel. The walls were paper thin, the radiator coughed like a dying smoker every 10 minutes, and the communal bathroom had one working showerhead that screamed when you turned it on. My roommate, a political science major from a family of lawyers in Oregon, had brought 3 suitcases, a Keurig, and a miniature fridge stuffed with almond milk and pre-cut fruit. I had a duffel bag, 1 towel, and $27 left in my checking account after buying my textbooks used off a guy who smelled like weed and broken dreams. Still, I didn't complain. I had my acceptance letter taped above my desk and the knowledge that I hadn't asked anyone for a damn thing, which, in some twisted way, made me feel safer than a padded bank account ever could. That first semester was a blur of long nights, cheap food, and the creeping realization that while intelligence might earn you a seat at the table, surviving the feast required a completely different set of tools. My classes were brutal, not because I couldn't handle the content, but because every time I opened my mouth in lecture halls filled with kids who'd been prepped for debate tournaments and AP boot camps since middle school, I could feel the gap between my world and theirs widening like a fault line. They referenced authors I'd never read, theories I'd never heard of, and expected everyone else to know what they meant. I started spending more time in the library, not because I loved the smell of old books or the silence, but because it was the only place I could hide my panic and catch up without anyone noticing how far behind I'd started. I lived off rice and ramen, the kind that comes in plastic blocks and costs less than $1, the kind you can cook with hot water from a dorm coffee maker if the stove is broken or if your exhaustion makes boiling water feel like too big a task. I worked part-time at the campus bookstore, restocking shelves and folding sweatshirts for students whose parents loaded up their cards at the beginning of each semester without blinking. Sometimes, I would help girls who looked like the life my mother probably imagined when she said, "Don't stress too much, honey." They bought pink planners, brand new textbooks, mugs that said things like, "Girl Boss," and they called their dads to ask whether to buy the regular MacBook or the MacBook Air. I kept my mouth shut and smiled, even when their credit cards rang up totals that made my stomach turn. Ethan, meanwhile, was thriving. He called occasionally, not to check in, not really, but to brag under the paper-thin veil of brotherly concern. He talked about lectures with former ambassadors, about internship offers from think tanks and hedge funds, about nights out in the city with the real future of America. He joked that I must be doing something cute like studying literature or childhood development. I told him I was double majoring in statistics and computer science. He laughed. Then he said, "Well, good luck. Don't burn out too soon." My parents never visited. Not once. My mom sent me a text on Thanksgiving that said, "Hope you're doing okay, love you," with no follow-up, no call. My dad didn't message at all. But Ethan posted a family photo from home that week, captioned, "Grateful for the ones who believe in me." I stared at that photo for a long time, not because I missed them, but because something inside me finally snapped into place. There they were, smiling around the dinner table like I didn't exist, like my seat had never been there to begin with. That winter, when everyone else went home for break, I stayed on campus, crashing in the dorms they left open for international students and kids with nowhere to go. I signed up for an extra online class, started applying to every competition and hackathon I could find, and accepted a volunteer position in a research lab just to get experience. I wore the same coat every day, the zipper broken halfway up, because fixing it would cost more than I could spare. I lived off black coffee and vending machine peanuts, but I got work published in a minor academic journal and finished my freshman year with a GPA that made my advisor blink twice and ask, "Where the hell did you come from?" No one knew. No one had to. That was the point. The second year was easier, not because life suddenly got generous, but because I'd gotten faster, tougher, and more immune to the background noise of other people's privilege. I got a paid internship with a small software firm, ran code in between lectures, and learned to stretch $100 over 2 weeks without flinching. I didn't make friends easily, I didn't trust easily, but I built connections, the kind of quiet relationships forged through shared ambition and mutual respect, not parties and dorm gossip. I found people who didn't care where I came from, only whether I could deliver. One night, during finals, I was working late in the lab when I got a call from my mom. It had been weeks since I'd heard her voice. She said she just wanted to check in, that things had been busy with Ethan's graduation plans, and asked if I'd thought about coming home for summer. I told her I'd already lined up a research assistantship and couldn't afford to take a break. She sighed, one of those deep, weary sighs that made you feel like you were the burden. Then she said, "Just don't push yourself too hard. We don't want you burning out before you find a husband." It wasn't said cruelly. It wasn't even meant to hurt. But I hung up before I could stop myself, sat there in the dark lab, lit only by the glow of my monitor and the soft hum of a server fan, and I whispered out loud, "They still don't get it." And maybe they never would. But I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I hadn't been, not really, since the night I left that note on the kitchen table. What I was building now, this strange, exhausting, exhilarating version of my life, it was mine. And I wasn't giving a single piece of it back. It had been nearly 4 years since I'd sat across from my family at the dining room table, and as I pulled into their driveway that cold December evening, the porch light casting an overly familiar glow across the frostbitten grass, I realized that nothing about the house had changed, not the cracked window above the kitchen sink, not the way the front steps creaked under your feet, not even the plastic wreath my mother hung on the door every Christmas like some tired badge of normalcy. What had changed, however, was me, though I had no intention of announcing that fact like a headline. I had come prepared to play the part they still expected of me, the doing okay daughter who didn't stir the pot, who sat quietly, complimented the mashed potatoes, and smiled politely when the conversation drifted toward my brother's latest victory lap through life. Ethan had arrived before me, naturally, pulling up in his silver Mercedes that looked so freshly waxed it could have doubled as a mirror, and stepping out in one of those quarter-zip sweaters that practically screamed East Coast finance. He was already inside by the time I walked up the porch steps, and when I pushed open the door and stepped into the warmth of my childhood home, the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon candles hit me like a wall of memories I didn't ask for. My mother greeted me with her usual tight, fragile hug, the kind that ends too quickly, like she's afraid I might not want it, and my father didn't bother standing up from his armchair, just lifted his beer in the air and said, "Look who finally decided to show up." I smiled, one of those slow, patient smiles that doesn't reach your eyes, and said, "Merry Christmas," like the words meant something deeper than they did. I hung up my coat, walked into the kitchen, and helped myself to a glass of water, watching from the corner of my eye as Ethan talked about stock options and how the market was practically begging to be played right now. My dad chuckled like he understood, like he could somehow participate in the world Ethan inhabited now, and my mom kept bustling between the stove and the counter, her cheeks flushed from the oven heat and whatever passive guilt she carried around like a second apron. Dinner was served at 6. The table looked just like it always had: chipped plates, a too bright centerpiece of fake poinsettias, and the same uneven candles that had been melted and remelted over the years. My mother had gone all out, as usual, laying out ham, scalloped potatoes, green beans with those crunchy fake onions on top, and a pie that looked store-bought but would be passed off as homemade. We all sat down, passed the dishes around, and Ethan, not missing a beat, launched into a monologue about his upcoming promotion, his firm's new office in Boston, and how the guy I'm replacing didn't even know how to handle a deal over $5 million. My dad beamed. My mom nodded so much I thought her neck might give out. And then, as I quietly spooned green beans onto my plate, Ethan turned to me and said, with that half laugh he used when he was about to land a jab wrapped in brotherly charm, "So, you still doing that computer thing, or did you finally get bored of it?" I looked at him, calmly, and replied, "Still doing that computer thing. Got promoted to lead data analyst last month. We're developing AI models for medical diagnostics now. It's not flashy, but it's saving lives." The room went quiet for a second, not out of awe, not out of pride, but because they genuinely didn't know what to say. My dad cleared his throat and took a long sip of beer. My mom nodded with a tight smile, and Ethan shrugged and said, "Well, good for you. Even girls can code now, huh?" He laughed like it was harmless. My father chuckled. My mother looked down at her plate and adjusted the salt shaker like it was a fragile artifact. I sat there, fork in hand, not angry, just tired. Tired of being reduced, tired of pretending, tired of squeezing myself into a role that had never been mine. But I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself or lecture them or storm out of the room. I just ate my dinner in silence, smiled when they expected me to smile, and nodded along when the topic drifted to Ethan's vacation plans in Switzerland and whether the new tax laws would affect his bonuses. After dessert, while my mom wrapped leftovers in plastic containers and my dad settled into the recliner with another beer, I stepped outside into the cold night air, pulling my coat tight around me. My breath visible in the porch light as I leaned against the railing and stared up at the empty winter sky. I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend to vent. I didn't even pull out my phone. I just stood there and let the silence fill me until I felt something harden, not in a bitter way, but in a resolved one. I realized, standing there in the dark with the echo of my brother's smirk still ringing in my ears, that I would never be able to change them. They were built on beliefs too old and too ingrained to be dismantled by any resume I built or title I earned. But what I could do was build something they could never touch. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I drove back to the city. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just packed my bag, slid into my car, and started driving with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. That night, after unpacking and making myself a cup of tea in the tiny kitchen of my apartment, I opened my laptop and began the process of looking at real estate listings near my old university. I didn't need a house. I could barely afford the idea of one. But something in me had clicked, something deep and slow-burning, and I knew, without needing to say it out loud, that it was time to make a move. Not to prove anything, not to wave a flag of victory, but to carve out a space in the world that belonged entirely to me. Buying a house wasn't revenge. It wasn't petty. It was deliberate. It was calculated. It was the final step in a long, quiet plan that had started the moment they told me not to stress too much about college. I was done playing along. From now on, I was writing the script. And they could watch from the sidelines if they wanted, but I wasn't inviting them to the table anymore. The morning I closed on the house, the air felt heavier than usual, like something unspoken had been following me, waiting patiently in the margins of my life for this exact moment, not to celebrate me, but to test me. The signing took place in a quiet, wood-paneled office on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and the receptionist smiles without ever looking up from her computer, and as I signed my name on the dotted lines, initialing here, and again here, I felt the paper tremble just slightly under my hand, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the overwhelming realization that I had finally bought something no one could take credit for, rewrite, or dismiss with a joke. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. It was a declaration written in concrete and drywall and square footage. It was proof that I had made it on my own terms, and even though no one from my family had been part of the journey, they would inevitably have to witness the result. The house itself was small, but not insignificant. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors scuffed by previous tenants, but still warm under bare feet, a living room with a wide window that caught the morning light just right, and a porch that creaked when you leaned into it like it had secrets to tell if you knew how to listen. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, mortgage and all. Located just 10 blocks from the university I had once attended on a full scholarship they never asked about, it stood as a quiet monument to everything they didn't see, everything they chose not to acknowledge. I spent the first night there alone, curled up on an inflatable mattress, eating grocery store sushi and drinking cheap wine straight from the bottle, letting the silence settle around me like a long overdue exhale. It was the next morning, in a fit of defiance or maybe clarity, that I took the photo. Nothing fancy, just me standing in front of the house in an old hoodie, holding the keys up to the camera with a half smile, one foot on the porch and the other still in the gravel driveway. The caption came to me without thought, almost instinctively, as if it had been sitting in the back of my mind for years, waiting for this precise moment to crawl into daylight. I wrote, "They paid for his Ivy League. I paid for my future. Here's to girls who weren't supposed to matter." And I hit post. I didn't expect it to go viral. I wasn't chasing validation or applause. I wasn't even trying to stir the pot. I just wanted, for once, to say something out loud that I had been whispering to myself since I was 16 years old and heard my father say, "Girls don't need fancy education." But within hours, the likes started rolling in, followed by comments, first from old classmates and acquaintances, then from strangers, then from friends of strangers who tagged each other in disbelief. Some comments were celebratory, empowering even, full of "you go, girl," and "this is the energy we need," but others were laced with condescension, irritation, and outright hostility. People who had never met me decided I was bitter, ungrateful, unnecessarily aggressive, and probably lying. One woman accused me of fabricating the story to get social media clout, while a man with an American flag in his profile picture wrote, "Typical feminist spin, maybe your brother was just smarter." I could have turned off the comments, but I didn't. I read every single one. I let the words wash over me, not because I enjoyed the sting, but because I needed to remember exactly what it felt like to be underestimated, misjudged, and dismissed for speaking my truth, even after earning every inch of ground I had claimed. The comment section became a battlefield, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Ethan texted me. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. He wrote, "What the hell is this? Why are you doing this to the family?" For a few minutes, I stared at the screen, the blue bubble glowing like a silent dare. Then I wrote back, "Why did the family do this to me?" He didn't reply. But 5 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice was tight, strained, laced with an urgency that almost made me laugh because she hadn't called in months, hadn't checked in when I got the promotion, hadn't even texted when she knew I was applying for home loans. But now, with the family name being dragged in a Facebook post, suddenly it was an emergency. "I know you're angry," she said. Her words clipped like she was reading from a script, "but do you really think this is the way to handle it?" I asked her what it was, and she paused like I had asked a question she hadn't prepared for. "The resentment," she finally said. "You're holding on to so much resentment, Emily." I laughed then, a bitter, exhausted laugh that didn't sound like me. "I'm not holding on to anything. I let go the moment I realized you were never going to see me the way you see him." She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just said, "You know your father's very upset," as if that were a reason to feel shame, as if his discomfort should be more important than my silence finally breaking. 2 days later, someone sent me a screenshot of a group chat, one I had never been part of but apparently existed among Ethan, my father, and a few extended relatives. In it, they discussed my post like it was a personal attack, not a personal story. My father had written, "She's always been jealous. Let her have her crumbs." And Ethan responded, "She thinks owning a house near her state school makes her a success. It's cute." I didn't respond. Not publicly. Not to them. But inside, something shifted. Because this wasn't about a house anymore. It wasn't even about the post. It was about a lifelong pattern of erasure, of casual cruelty hidden beneath family photos and polite small talk, of systemic dismissal masquerading as tradition and just how we were raised. I had spent years trying to prove that I was enough, that I had value outside the roles they assigned me, and now that I had something tangible to show for it, they were more threatened by the narrative than by anything I had actually done. I wasn't angry. I was finished. And that's more dangerous than anger ever was. In the week that followed the storm, I had set off, unintentionally, though perhaps not entirely without premonition. I found myself waking up each morning with the kind of clarity that doesn't arrive with comfort, but with finality. Like stepping out of a burning house and watching it collapse behind you, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The house I had bought stood firm and quiet in the early winter light, the kind of quiet that doesn't beg for attention but commands it in stillness, and I spent those first few mornings walking barefoot through the rooms, listening to the creak of the floorboards, feeling the faint cold of the wood under my heels, thinking not of paint colors or furniture or appliances, but of memory, the kind that attaches itself to places and people long after they've said their piece and left. My post was still circulating, still igniting heated debates between people I would never meet, people who saw themselves in my story or saw something they didn't like and wanted to cut it down, and as the internet did what the internet always does, inflate, distort, consume, I sat in the center of it, silent but aware, knowing I had touched a nerve far deeper than just family dynamics. I had pointed, however quietly, to a generational crack that ran through so many households, especially the ones that looked normal on the outside, the ones with polite holiday cards and manicured lawns, the ones that handed down inequality like a family heirloom but never called it by name. Ethan never responded to my last message. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any insult he could have typed, and by the end of that week, he had removed me from every group chat, unfollowed me on social media, and, in one final gesture that made me laugh out loud from the sheer absurdity of it, blocked me from viewing his LinkedIn. My father didn't reach out either. No call. No text. No middleman email forwarded through my mother with some vague message about letting things cool down. It was as if, by speaking a truth they had comfortably buried under decades of unspoken rules, I had become something less than family, something inconvenient, unsightly, and better left ignored. And yet, despite everything, despite the dismissal, the erasure, the small-hearted pettiness of their response, I found myself printing 3 copies of the house key. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. It was a decision rooted in clarity, in the full and sober understanding that no matter how far I had come, a small, stubborn part of me still wanted to confront the silence, not with violence, but with possibility. I placed each key inside a plain white envelope, no letter, no explanation, no return address. One I dropped in the mailbox for Ethan. One I hand-delivered to the house I grew up in, slipping it through the mail slot while the porch light flickered above me, a silent offering to a home that had never made room for me. And the third I left taped to my own front door, a placeholder for a door that would stay locked until someone made the choice to knock. Days passed. Nothing happened. The internet moved on, as it always does, and the comments slowed to a trickle of belated opinions and misinterpretations. I went back to work, back to a routine that now felt strangely foreign, as if something elemental had shifted. I stopped checking the family group thread, which had gone dark anyway, and I deleted the bookmarked folder that held my brother's LinkedIn, my parents' Facebook, and the group chat screenshots that, for a brief, pathetic moment, I had saved as proof. Then, one Thursday evening, overcast, quiet, the kind of dusk that slips in unnoticed, I heard the screen door creak. I had just made tea, not expecting anyone, when I looked through the window and saw my mother standing on the porch, holding her purse like a shield, her eyes scanning the house with a look that was equal parts fear and nostalgia. I didn't open the door right away. I watched her stand there, unsure, clutching something in her other hand, a manila folder, slightly bent at the corners. When I finally stepped out, the air between us felt thick, like we were moving through water. I wasn't sure if I should come, she said, and for the first time in years, she sounded like someone who had lost her script. I said nothing. I didn't have to. She held out the folder. I took it, not looking inside at first, and we stood there in silence until she said, "I saved them. All of them." When I opened it, I saw pages and pages of old essays, typed, double-spaced, some printed on cheap paper with faint ink streaks, others carefully marked with notes in the margins. They were mine. High school essays, scholarship applications, cover letters, even the personal statement I'd written late at night while the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep. She had them all. Preserved. Highlighted. Annotated with words I had never heard her say aloud. "I always knew you'd be the one," she said, her voice thin and trembling. "But your father, he didn't see it. He still doesn't." And maybe that was meant to excuse him. Maybe it was just a statement of fact. Either way, I let it land where it landed. I didn't reach for her. I didn't invite her in. I just stepped aside and watched as she placed the key back in my hand, fingers brushing mine for only a second. "I'm not ready yet," she whispered. I nodded. Not in judgment, not in forgiveness, but in understanding. She turned and left, and I stood there for a long time, holding that old folder, the air cold against my knuckles, the tea inside growing cold on the counter. Later that night, I sat at the table by the window, the folder spread out in front of me, the key beside my mug, and I thought about the line between recognition and redemption, how sometimes they never meet, how sometimes the people who hurt you never become the people who heal you. I thought about how easy it would have been to burn those essays years ago, to pretend none of it mattered, and how much harder it is to carry proof of what you were always capable of. I never heard from Ethan again. My father remained silent, buried in his pride. But every time I opened my door, I left the light on not for them, not exactly, but for the girl I used to be, the one who stayed up late typing in secret, who packed her bags without a single soul cheering her on, who left a note on the kitchen table instead of asking for help. And if someone ever knocks again, well, I'll decide then whether the door opens. Because the key was never just for them. It was always, in some strange, stubborn way, for me.